Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking at a source that, well, it lays out some pretty striking claims. It's all about the alleged construction of what it calls a digital control apparatus.
Yeah, and the viewpoint is definitely unique. It comes from someone who's seen things from the inside deep experience in Wall Street finance, but also in the U.S. government.
Right.
So that gives a particular angle on how power and money systems might connect, behind the curtain.
Exactly. And just to be clear, our job here today isn't to say if these claims are true or not. We're basically guides. We're going through the specific material, unpacking what it claims, how the source says these mechanisms work, and seeing what core ideas we can pull out. We're sticking just to what the source presents.
It's about understanding what they're saying is going on and why they seem to believe it's happening.
Okay, so let's get into the background that shapes this viewpoint. The source had a significant career, first on Wall Street, then moving into government. Specifically served in the first Bush administration.
That's right, as Assistant Secretary of Housing and Federal Housing Commissioner. And it was there, overseeing mortgage markets, that they say they ran into, pervasive corruption.
And a really central claim comes out of this period, doesn't it?
Yeah, the idea that a big chunk of the government's black budget, the secret, unaudited money, is actually financed through mortgage fraud.
Wow, that's quite a connection to make, linking housing finance to secret government spending.
And apparently this confrontation with what they saw as systemic problems led to years of really intense legal battles with the Department of Justice.
He described it very vividly, I recall, saying it felt like living the movie Enemy of the State.
Exactly. So that paints a picture, right? A perspective shaped by feeling targeted by the very system they were part of.
It definitely sets a context. And that experience seems to have pushed them to look harder at government finances, trying to figure out where huge amounts of money might be. Well, hidden.
Which leads right into a core premise of their whole argument, that there are just massive, unaccounted for funds sloshing around inside the government.
And the numbers the source points to they're hard to ignore. They talk about claims of $21 trillion in undocumentable adjustments. That was as of 2015.
Right, and undocumentable adjustments. I mean, that basically means huge sums moving around the government's books without a clear audit trail, like an accounting black hole.
Yeah.
And the source also zeroes in on HUD, the department they knew well, saying it was missing something like $1 trillion from its financial statements between 1998 and 2015.
$1 trillion?
Yeah.
Just from HUD. That's a staggering figure over that time.
It is. And they connect this to other well-known financial question marks, like the money the Department of Defense couldn't account for, the 2.3 or maybe $4 trillion figure that was talked about around 9/11.
Okay, so they're pointing to multiple instances of...
And they drive this point home with a quote they attribute to a former intelligence officer. Apparently, this person said, HUD was the candy store of covert revenues.
The candy store, implying it was deliberately used for off-the-books funding.
That's the implication within the source's framework, yes, that this isn't just bad bookkeeping.
So according to the source, these missing trillions aren't just lost, they're potentially funding something specific, something hidden.
That's their big speculation, that this money is bankrolling a whole new system. They use terms like a breakaway civilization or maybe the hidden infrastructure for a future global government.
And what kind of things might this funding go towards, in their view?
Well, they suggest things like super advanced black budget tech, maybe invisible weaponry, even secret space programs. It's the source's attempt to answer, where did the money go and what's it making possible?
And the end goal of this alleged hidden system, that's what the source terms the control grid.
Exactly, the control grid. They describe it as this comprehensive system built for complete control.
Why now? Why would the source think such a system is needed or wanted at this point in time?
The argument they present ties it to global shifts. The world moving away from one dominant power, a unipolar world, towards multiple centers of power, multipolar.
Okay.
And in that shift, the source argues it gets harder for those formerly dominant powers to just extract resources globally like they used to.
Right, less direct control internationally.
So the source claims this means they need to cut back domestically, but doing that could cause huge social problems, right? So to manage those potential cutbacks and unrest, the source posits that complete control starts to look very helpful.
So the control grid is framed as a tool for domestic management, essentially, because global dominance is fading. What's the main way this control would actually work?
The absolute core mechanism, according to the source, is digital technology, and specifically getting everyone onto an all-digital financial system.
And they give some pretty concrete, maybe even chilling examples of what that could mean, don't they?
They do. They point to things like the pandemic lockdowns as a kind of potential dry run. In a totally digital money system, they theorize you could literally program money so, well, it won't work outside your house.
You could order pizza online.
Yeah, but if the transaction registers as happening outside your designated zone, the payment just fails. That's the kind of granular control they're talking about.
Or things like being able to remotely switch off connected devices, like electric cars.
And maybe the most direct example they give is the idea of mandating something, say, a health requirement, like getting a shot and enforcing it simply by being able to switch off your access to your money if you don't comply.
Yeah.
The source is very clear. They see this programmability, this ability to turn financial access on and off based on rules, as the direct path to complete control.
Okay, so if that's the goal, complete control via digital finance, what does the source say are the necessary building blocks? What do you need to construct this thing?
They lay out two main requirements. First up, a really solid digital ID system. They talk about needing a very high-quality, precision national ID that's interoperable with all the other IDs around the world.
Interoperable, so they all talk to each other globally.
Exactly. They point to the push for Real ID in the US as, an example of laying that foundation, getting everyone tagged and linked digitally.
Makes sense. What's the second piece?
An all-digital financial system. Which means, as the source bluntly puts it, you have to kill cash and make everybody interact digitally.
Get rid of physical money altogether.
Right. They mention things like pushing tax payments and Social Security benefits towards digital-only delivery, even talk about getting rid of pennies, small steps that all nudge people away from physical cash.
So, digital ID, no cash. Then the source gets really specific about how this digital money system might actually be structured. They focus heavily on stablecoins, right? Sure.
Yes, very much so. The source argues that stablecoins, specifically ones backed by government debt, are the chosen tool here. Not necessarily central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, issued directly by governments.
Interesting distinction. Why stablecoins, and how would this work according to the source? They mention something called the Genius Act plan.
Yeah, they reference that as a kind of model. The core idea, they claim, is that these stablecoins wouldn't be issued by the government itself, like the Treasury or the Fed directly. Instead, they'd come from subsidiaries of the big private banks that, already own the Federal Reserve System.
So using the existing private banking structure.
Leveraging that power, yeah. It's presented as a move towards a privately issued but still centrally influenced digital currency.
And how would these stablecoins be backed? What gives them value?
The source says they'd be fully collateralized by the dollar, meaning backed by actual bank deposits or more likely U.S. Treasury bills and bonds.
Okay, so tied to government debt.
Exactly. And the source argues this is really clever because it does two things at once. One, it creates a digital dollar that people can use. Two, it creates its massive built-in global demand for U.S. government debt to act as the collateral.
Right, a captive market for treasuries. So using digital currency to prop up government borrowing, what's the alleged global play here?
The strategy, as the source sees it, is to push these dollar-backed stablecoins out globally, using things everyone already has on their phones, like Google Pay, Apple Pay, these universal payment wallets.
Okay.
The goal, get people all over the world to shift away from their own local currencies and start using these dollar stablecoins instead.
How would they convince people to do that?
The source claims the plan involves pumping out massive amounts of private credit along with the stablecoins, basically offering easy digital loans and credit lines to make switching really attractive, a kind of digital financial carrot.
Extending dollar influence digitally through private credit. But why go this route? Through private bank subsidiaries, instead of a direct government CBDC? What's the advantage, according to the source?
They suggest it's about control and oversight. Or maybe, lack thereof. A private structure, the source argues, might give the banks and the system operators some degree of freedom from the kind of direct congressional oversight the Fed itself might face.
So potentially less accountability.
That's the concern raised, that this private structure could make the whole control system operate in their words, out of control of normal public checks and balances.
That's a really crucial part of their argument, the structure itself potentially enabling less transparency. And this connects to a quote they highlight, right, from a major global financial player.
Yes, they emphasize a quote from Augustin Carstens, the general manager of the Bank for International Settlements, BIS, back in 2020. It's pretty stark. He apparently said, regarding central bank digital currencies, we can make the rules of what you can do with your money, and we can enforce the rules of what you can do with your money.
Wow, that's very direct.
It is. And the source links that directly back to that pizza example, the potential to literally program rules into the money itself.
So it's not just tracking, it's actively controlling how money can even be used.
Precisely. And the source adds another layer here, technology. They claim that with powerful AI and software, this isn't just about broad rules. It could become an entirely granular control system.
Granular, meaning?
Meaning tailored down to the individual. Specific rules applied to one person at a time, but scalable enough, they claim, to potentially cover all 8 billion people on the planet.
Okay, that level of potential control is significant. And this then feeds into the social credit idea the source talks about.
Exactly. That's presented as the next layer. The social credit system determines how those programmable money rules get applied to you personally. It works by collecting and analyzing data about you to assign some kind of score or status.
So be good, get more freedom, be bad, get locked down.
That's the basic concept presented. Being good might mean you can travel freely, or your money works everywhere. Being rated bad could mean you're locked out. Maybe you can't travel, maybe certain purchases are blocked.
How does the source claim the data for this is being gathered? Where does it come from?
They argue it's being built by pulling together huge government databases that used to be separate. Specifically, they mention combining Social Security data, IRS tax information, and Treasury payment data. Basically, core identity and financial records held by the government.
Merging these massive, previously siloed data sets.
Yes. And then comes another big claim from the source. The alleged privatization of this combined data. The idea is taking all this sensitive government info and feeding it into private artificial intelligence systems.
Private AI.
Yeah. They mention companies like XAI and specifically Palantir AI, noting that Palantir apparently has contracts with Treasury and the IRS for enforcement. The source sees this as potentially relevant.
So aggregate government data, then hand it off to private AI, possibly for enforcement actions tied to the financial system. That's a major part of the source's picture.
That is the picture they paint, yes, based on moves they observe. They also mention healthcare data being pulled into this mix, referencing efforts, like those associated with the Kennedys, apparently, in aggregating large health data sets. It all adds to the profile, in their view.
Now, the source does admit that data aggregation itself isn't new, right? They talked about the data beast back in the 90s. What's different now, according to them?
The critical change, they argue, is unsiloing everything and moves it private and puts it on an out-of-control basis. It's the combination of all these different data types, plus the alleged move to manage it and apply rules using private systems, potentially outside public oversight, that they see as the really significant and dangerous development.
And we should stress again, the source presents this whole aggregation and privatization plan as their analysis based on things they see happening. They frame it like, if I wanted to build a control grid, this is exactly how I'd do it.
Precisely. It's their interpretation, connecting dots between finance, tech, government data handling, and proposing this larger, coherent strategy aimed at, well, digital control.
Okay, so let's quickly recap the main points we've pulled from this source today. We started with this unique perspective, someone with deep finance and government experience.
Right, whose own experiences with alleged corruption and these huge sums of missing money, the $21 trillion in adjustments, the HUD and DoD funds led them to theorize it's funding something big and hidden, like a breakaway civilization.
Then we got into the core idea, the digital control grid. The source sees it as designed for complete control, maybe motivated by a changing world order, and built primarily on digital tech.
Especially an all-digital financial system. We talked about those examples controlling money geographically, enforcing mandates by turning off access.
And the building blocks needed, that high-tech, interoperable digital ID, and the push to kill cash, making digital interaction unavoidable.
Then the focus on stablecoins issued by private bank subsidiaries, that Genius Act model idea as the chosen mechanism, allegedly used for global influence, creating demand for U.S. debt.
And potentially structured to be less accountable than a direct government CBDC.
Yeah, leading to that stark BIS quote about making and enforcing rules on money use, and the source's claim about AI enabling incredibly granular person-by-person control globally.
And finally, the social credit piece. Built, the source claims, by merging huge government data sets, Social Security, IRS, Treasury, even health data.
And then the controversial claim about potentially privatizing this data, feeding it into private AI systems like Palantir for analysis and enforcement. A big shift, they argue, towards an out-of-control system, though again presented as their conjecture based on observed trend.
Right, so these are definitely significant and for some maybe alarming claims and analyses from the source we looked at. We've tried to just lay out what the source says impartially so you can understand this particular viewpoint on where things might be heading digitally.
And understanding perspectives like this one, that posit this kind of deliberate construction of a control apparatus using finance and tech. It can be relevant because, well, our lives are becoming more digital every day. This offers one lens, one framework for thinking about the changes you see happening around you.
So maybe a final thought to leave you with, something to mull over from all this.
Yeah.
If you consider the potential capabilities outlined in this source, the digital IDs, the programmable money, the AI crunching massive personal data, the social scoring, what does individual freedom, privacy, autonomy even look like in that kind of world?
Yeah, what questions does that raise for you personally about navigating a future that might involve these kinds of digital forces, and how might people respond or adapt if these claims reflect reality?
Definitely something to think about.